Dr. Marcus Flynn had processed exactly 4,732 genetic scans in his 3 years working at the Galactic Health Consortium's outpost on Station Nebula 7. Not that he was counting. Okay, fine, he was absolutely counting. Because when your job involves staring at alien DNA sequences for 8 hours a day while sipping coffee that tastes like recycled engine coolant, you need something to keep your sanity intact. Dr. Flynn, Dr. Flynn. The voice belonged to Zephyr, the overly enthusiastic Centaurian intern who somehow managed to find the discovery of basic cellular mitosis as exciting as winning the galactic lottery. His 3 eyes practically sparkled every time he looked through a microscope, which would have been endearing if it wasn't so aggressively cheerful at 7 in the morning. "What is it now, Zephyr?" Marcus asked, not bothering to look up from his workstation where he was processing travel permit applications. Standard stuff. A Rigelian businessman needed clearance for Proxima Centauri, a family of Andromedans wanted to vacation on Earth's moon, and a vegan delegation required health certificates for some diplomatic function that probably involved a lot of handshaking and awkward small talk about interspecies relations. "I have discovered something fascinating about the protein synthesis in Altairian cellular structures," Zephyr announced, bouncing slightly on his 6 legs. "The way their amino acids chain together is simply revolutionary for our understanding of." "That's great, kid. File it under things that are probably important but not before I finish my coffee." Marcus took another sip of the brownish liquid that the station's food synthesizers optimistically labeled as coffee and grimaced. He made a mental note to file a complaint with maintenance. Again. The morning proceeded with its usual mind-numbing routine until Marcus reached the last sample in his queue. Standard human genetic material, probably from some Earth tourist who needed a health clearance for one of the Outer Rim colonies. He loaded the sample into the scanner, entered the processing commands, and reached for his coffee mug. That's when every alarm in the facility decided to have a simultaneous nervous breakdown. Red lights flashed. Sirens wailed. Emergency lockdown protocols engaged with the subtle grace of a meteor impact. And there, blazing across every screen in the lab in letters that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, was a single word: weapon. "Well," Marcus said, staring at the chaos erupting around him, "this is new." The sample identifier displayed on the screen next to the warning, and Marcus felt his stomach drop somewhere in the vicinity of his boots. It was his own routine health check from that morning. Apparently, according to the most advanced genetic analysis equipment in the known galaxy, Dr. Marcus Flynn was a weapon of mass destruction. "This is either the best practical joke in galactic history," he muttered, watching as security drones began swarming outside the lab windows, "or I'm about to have a very bad day." The first alien through the door had 8 arms, 6 eyes, and the general disposition of someone who had been personally insulted by the concept of relaxation. Commander Throck of Station Security looked like he could strangle a black hole with his bare tentacles, assuming black holes had necks. "Step away from the scanner, human," Throck commanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority usually reserved for people who could bench press small asteroids. "You are now under protective custody pending investigation of your biological weapon status." Biological weapon status? Marcus raised his hands in what he hoped was a non-threatening gesture, though given the current circumstances, even breathing probably qualified as suspicious behavior. "Commander, there's obviously been some kind of mistake. I'm a geneticist, not a—" "The scanner has identified weapon-grade genetic sequences in your DNA," interrupted Dr. Vera Blackwood as she strode into the lab. Marcus's supervisor was a brilliant scientist who had the unfortunate habit of being right about everything, which would have been more tolerable if she wasn't also devastatingly attractive in that dangerous intellectual who could probably dissect you molecularly and to explain why it was scientifically fascinating kind of way. "Weapon grade?" Marcus looked between Throck's suspicious glare and Vera's analytical stare. "What does that even mean?" Zephyr, who had been cowering behind a lab bench during the security invasion, suddenly popped up with his usual inappropriate enthusiasm. "Oh, Dr. Flynn, this is absolutely remarkable. Your genetic code contains sequences that match weapon blueprints in 17 different galactic databases. And that, he paused dramatically, your DNA literally spells out boom in ancient Vulcarian script when read in the correct amino acid sequence. Marcus blinked. My DNA spells boom? It's quite fascinating from a xenolinguistic perspective, Vera added, apparently finding his potential status as a walking weapon academically intriguing. The probability of random genetic mutation creating recognizable text in an alien language is approximately 0, Throck interjected grimly. Which means this was intentional. You, human, are clearly a sleeper agent designed to infiltrate galactic society. A sleeper agent? Marcus looked around the lab at the faces staring back at him. Have you people met me? Yesterday I got locked out of my own quarters because I forgot my access code. Last week I tried to make toast and somehow triggered a fire suppression system. If I'm a weapon, I'm definitely a malfunctioning one. That's exactly what a well-designed sleeper agent would say, Throck replied, his multiple eyes narrowing in suspicion. Or, Vera said thoughtfully, it's exactly what someone who's genuinely confused would say. We need more data before jumping to conclusions, Commander. Marcus appreciated the support, even if it was couched in scientific methodology rather than personal faith in his non-weapon-like character. Thank you, Vera. At least someone around here believes in innocent until proven guilty. Oh, I didn't say I believed you were innocent, she replied with a slight smile. I said we needed more data. There's a difference. The station's communication system crackled to life with an announcement that made Marcus's day significantly worse. Attention all personnel. News of the human weapon discovery has been transmitted to the Galactic Council. Please remain calm while we investigate this unprecedented biological threat. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair. Fantastic. I went from being nobody special to being a galactic incident in the span of 20 minutes. That might actually be a personal record. Sir, Zephyr added helpfully, the good news is that you're now the most scientifically interesting human in recorded galactic history. Somehow, Marcus replied, that doesn't make me feel better. By hour 3 of what Marcus had started calling the Great Weapon Misunderstanding of 2387, but news of humanity's apparent biological weapon status had spread across the galaxy faster than his reputation for burning coffee. Which, considering he had somehow managed to make coffee that was simultaneously too weak and too bitter during his first week on the station, was saying something. The lab had become a circus of alien dignitaries, each more dramatically concerned than the last. Ambassador Quillax, who resembled a particularly pompous slug wearing diplomatic credentials, had slithered into the facility trailing an entourage of aide slugs and what Marcus could only assume were slug lawyers. This is an unprecedented biological threat to galactic peace, Quillax declared, his voice carrying the kind of gravitas usually reserved for announcing the heat death of the universe. Earth must be quarantined immediately until we can determine the extent of human weapon capabilities. Ambassador, Vera said with the patience of someone explaining basic physics to a particularly slow asteroid. We haven't even confirmed that the genetic sequences are actually weapons. They could be anything. Anything. Quillax's eye stalk swiveled toward her. The databases don't lie, Doctor. 17 separate civilizations have confirmed weapon matches in this human's genetic code. Marcus, who was currently sitting in what Throck had generously termed protective containment, but which looked suspiciously like a force field cage, decided to contribute to the conversation. Has anyone considered that maybe your databases might be just a tiny bit wrong? Impossible, declared a newly arrived Andromedan official whose name Marcus hadn't caught but whose attitude suggested he'd been personally offended by the concept of being wrong about anything. Our species has been cataloging biological weapons for over 3 millennia. And in all that time, Marcus continued, have you ever encountered a weapon that needed to drink coffee to function properly and got cranky when the air conditioning was too high? Actually, Zephyr interjected with his usual helpful enthusiasm. Several species have reported disturbing encounters with human weapon-like behavior. The Centaurians have documented cases of humans weaponizing sarcasm to devastating psychological effect. Marcus stared at his intern. They weaponized what now? Oh yes, Zephyr continued excitedly, and the Regillians reported humans capable of turning innocent household objects into tools of destruction. One incident involved a human defeating 3 trained warriors using only a metal-eating utensil and what they termed aggressive problem-solving. That wasn't weaponization, Marcus protested. That was Steve from accounting using a fork to fix the printer because your people don't understand percussive maintenance. Meanwhile, Throck had been implementing increasingly ridiculous security measures. The force field around Marcus now hummed with enough energy to power a small moon, but it had one critical flaw. It shorted out every time Marcus sneezed. Commander, Vera observed as Marcus's third sneeze of the hour caused another system reset. Perhaps we could focus on analyzing the actual genetic data rather than building increasingly elaborate containment systems? Negative, Throck replied, adding what appeared to be laser turrets to Marcus's containment area. This human has already demonstrated his ability to weaponize basic biological functions. I have allergies, Marcus called out as his next sneeze triggered another electrical failure. It's not a weapon, it's seasonal. The situation grew even more absurd when additional human genetic samples from the station's database began showing similar weapon signatures. Every human who had ever submitted genetic material for travel permits, medical examinations, or routine health checks was suddenly flagged as a potential biological weapon. This is galaxy-wide conspiracy, Quillex announced dramatically. Humanity has infiltrated our society with an army of walking weapons disguised as tourists, diplomats, and apparently geneticists with questionable coffee-making skills. Marcus watched the proceedings with growing disbelief. You know, he said to Vera, who was the only person still treating this as a scientific problem rather than an interstellar incident, when I got up this morning. My biggest concern was whether the food synthesizers would produce something that vaguely resembled eggs. Now I'm apparently patient zero in a galactic biological weapons crisis. Look on the bright side, Vera replied, not looking up from her analysis. You're certainly not having a boring day. Marcus considered this. I think I prefer boring days. While the rest of the station continued treating Marcus like he might spontaneously combust and take half the galaxy with him, Vera had been doing what she did best, actually solving the problem through rigorous scientific analysis instead of panic and increasingly creative security measures. I think I've found something, she announced, looking up from her workstation where genetic sequences scrolled across multiple displays in patterns that would have made a kaleidoscope jealous. Please tell me it's proof that I'm not a weapon, Marcus said from within his force field cage, which Throck had now upgraded to include motion sensors, atmospheric monitors, and what appeared to be a small weather station. Well, Vera said thoughtfully, you're definitely not a weapon in the traditional sense. That's the most backhanded reassurance I've ever received, Marcus replied. But I'll take it. What did you find? Vera gestured to her analysis. The genetic markers that the databases are identifying as weapon signatures aren't blueprints for actual weapons. They're something far more interesting. They're the genetic basis for human adaptability and survival instincts. Zephyr bounded over to look at the data, his enthusiasm undimmed by the ongoing crisis. Oh, fascinating. So the sequences that spell boom in Vulcarian are actually instructions for rapid problem-solving under pressure, Vera finished. What the alien databases are interpreting as weapon systems are actually humanity's unique ability to weaponize literally anything when survival is at stake. Weaponize anything? Ambassador Quillex's eye stalks drooped with what might have been concern or possibly indigestion. Marcus, despite being surrounded by enough security equipment to stop a small invasion, found himself inadvertently demonstrating Vera's point, faced with a coffee stirrer that had fallen into his containment field. a paperclip from his pocket, and Zephyr's boundless enthusiasm. He had unconsciously fashioned them into a makeshift tool for reaching the field's control panel. "Don't touch that," Throck yelled, but it was too late. Marcus had already used his improvised device to adjust the field's frequency, then making it significantly more comfortable and eliminating the annoying hum that had been giving him a headache. "See?" Vera said, pointing at Marcus's casual modification of advanced alien technology using office supplies and intern energy. "He didn't build a weapon. He built a solution." The Andromedan official looked confused. "But our databases clearly indicate these genetic patterns match known weapon configurations." "Because," Vera interrupted, "your databases have never encountered a species like humanity. You catalog things that are designed to destroy. Humans aren't designed to destroy, they're designed to adapt, survive, and solve problems using whatever's available. It just happens that this ability looks like weapon crafting to species that think in terms of purpose-built tools." Marcus tested his theory by examining the various security measures Throck had implemented around his containment area. Within minutes, he had identified 17 different ways to improve their efficiency, 3 methods for reducing their power consumption, and 1 technique for making them significantly less annoying to the person being contained. "Your survival instincts are remarkably comprehensive," Vera observed as Marcus unconsciously optimized his own prison. "Most species develop specialized responses to specific threats. Humans seem to have developed a generalized response to everything." "Is that good or bad?" Marcus asked, though he was already using a pen and his shoe to create a crude but effective ventilation system for his containment field. "From a scientific perspective, it's extraordinary," Vera replied. "From a galactic security perspective, it's apparently terrifying." Ambassador Quillex had been growing increasingly pale throughout this demonstration. "You're telling me that humans don't just have weapons, they can turn anything into a weapon?" "Not weapons," Marcus corrected, finishing his ventilation project. "Solutions. We just happen to be very creative about what constitutes a solution." "The distinction," Quillex said weakly, "may be less important than you think." Commander Throck, being the kind of security officer who believed that problems should be solved through the application of overwhelming force and suspicion, was not convinced by Vera's scientific explanation. "Theory is fine, Dr. Blackwood," he announced, his 8 arms gesturing dramatically, "but I need practical proof. If this human isn't a weapon, he should be able to undergo standard weapons testing without triggering his combat systems." Marcus, who was still imprisoned in what had now become the most comfortable and well-ventilated containment field in galactic history, looked skeptical. "Weapons testing? That sounds like the kind of thing that doesn't end well for the weapon." "It's perfectly safe," Throck assured him with the confidence of someone who had clearly never been on the receiving end of his own security measures. "We simply expose you to a series of controlled combat scenarios and monitor your responses." "And if I don't respond like a weapon?" Marcus asked. "Then we'll know you're not a weapon," Throck replied with impeccable circular logic. "And if I do respond like a weapon? Then we'll know you are a weapon." Marcus looked at Vera. "Is it just me, or is there a fundamental flaw in this testing methodology?" "The flaw," Vera said dryly, "is assuming that Commander Throck understands the scientific method." An hour later, Marcus found himself standing in what the station optimistically called a training facility, but in which looked more like an obstacle course designed by someone with a grudge against both physics and common sense. Throck had apparently borrowed equipment from several different species, resulting in a bizarre amalgamation of challenges that included Andromedan combat drones, Regelian maze puzzles, and what appeared to be a Centaurian customer service simulation. "The first challenge," Throck announced through the facility's speakers, "will test your combat reflexes. A standard security drone will attempt to neutralize you using non-lethal force." The drone that emerged from the wall looked like it could neutralize a small building using non-lethal force. It hovered in front of Marcus, weapons systems charging with ominous efficiency. Marcus looked at the drone. The drone looked at Marcus. Both seemed equally unimpressed with the situation. "Hey there," Marcus said to the drone. "Nice weather we're having for a completely unnecessary combat demonstration." The drone paused, apparently not programmed for conversational responses. "I'm guessing you're not enjoying this any more than I am," Marcus continued. "I mean, you're probably built for actual security work, not testing whether a confused geneticist might secretly be a biological weapon. That's got to be frustrating from a professional standpoint." The drone's weapons systems powered down slightly. "See, the thing is," Marcus went on, settling into the kind of reasonable tone usually reserved for explaining to customer service representatives why your billing statement doesn't make sense. "We both know this whole situation is ridiculous. You're a sophisticated piece of equipment being asked to fight someone whose greatest combat achievement is successfully opening a particularly stubborn jar of pickles." The drone lowered its weapons entirely. "So what do you say we just call this a draw and move on to whatever other unnecessarily complicated tests they've prepared?" The drone, apparently convinced by Marcus's argument, powered down and returned to its charging station. "Fascinating," Vera's voice came through the speakers. "He neutralized a combat drone using applied psychology and customer service techniques." "That's not how combat works," Throck protested. "It is for humans," Marcus replied, moving on to the next challenge. The Rigelian maze was designed to test spatial reasoning under pressure. Instead of solving it conventionally, Marcus spent 5 minutes explaining to the maze's control system why its design violated basic principles of efficient traffic flow, resulting in the maze reconfiguring itself into a more logical layout. The customer service simulation was defeated when Marcus turned the exercise around and began providing better customer service than the system was programmed to expect, causing it to file a complaint against itself. "This is not how weapons testing is supposed to work," Throck said, sounding increasingly frustrated. "Maybe that's because I'm not a weapon," Marcus suggested, having somehow turned an obstacle course into a series of reasonable conversations with inanimate objects. "The human appears to solve problems through social engineering and process optimization," Vera observed. "It's like he's treating everything as a customer service issue." "Is that not normal?" Zephyr asked. "For humans, apparently it is," Vera replied. "For everyone else, it's completely unprecedented." Marcus had made it through every challenge not by fighting, destroying, or conquering, but by identifying inefficiencies and suggesting improvements. He'd turned a weapons test into a quality control consultation. "Well," he said, looking up at the observation windows where his audience was watching in various states of confusion and amazement, "I think we can safely say I'm not a weapon. Unless you consider unsolicited process optimization to be a form of warfare." "Don't give them ideas," Vera warned. 3 days after the great genetic weapon misunderstanding of 2387 had nearly caused a galactic incident, Marcus was finally allowed to return to his regular job of processing routine genetic scans and drinking questionable coffee. The difference was that now he was doing it as the most scientifically interesting human in recorded galactic history. "Dr. Flynn, Dr. Flynn." Zephyr burst into the lab with his usual enthusiasm, though now it came with an official title. As the newly appointed head of human studies for the Galactic Health Consortium, Zephyr had traded his intern badge for something that looked remarkably similar but came with a modest pay increase and the authority to be excited about things in an official capacity. "What is it now, Zephyr?" Marcus asked, though his tone had warmed considerably since his intern had spent the crisis supporting his non-weapon status with unwavering enthusiasm. "The Andromedan Trade Federation has requested human consultation on their supply chain optimization project. Apparently, their efficiency problems are what they term impossible to solve using conventional methods." Marcus looked up from his genetic scanner. "They want me to help them with logistics?" "Not just you," Vera said. entering the lab with a smile that suggested she'd been having a much better week than Marcus. The entire galactic community has realized that humans aren't dangerous weapons, you're something potentially more valuable, universal problem solvers with an attitude. An attitude? Marcus raised an eyebrow. You turned a weapons test into a customer service review, she pointed out. If that's not attitude, I don't know what is. The past few days had seen a complete reversal in how the galaxy viewed humanity. Instead of biological weapons, humans were now being classified as universal adaptive problem resolution systems which, according to Ambassador Quolex, sounded much less threatening in diplomatic reports. The Rigelian Council wants human input on their traffic management crisis, Vera continued. The Centaurian Ministry of Education is requesting advice on curriculum development, and Commander Throck has asked if you'd be willing to review the station's security protocols for optimization opportunities. Throck wants my help. Marcus was genuinely surprised. Last week he thought I was going to explode and take half the station with me. He still does, Vera admitted. But now he's decided that if you're going to explode, you might as well fix a few things first. Marcus considered this logic and found it surprisingly sound, which probably said something disturbing about his own thought processes. There is one small complication, Vera continued, her expression shifting to something that might have been nervousness if she were the type of person who got nervous about anything. During the investigation, I had to analyze your genetic code very thoroughly. Very, very thoroughly. And? Marcus prompted. And I found your genetic sequences to be adequately fascinating. Marcus blinked. Coming from Vera, adequately fascinating was practically a declaration of undying devotion. Adequately fascinating? Perhaps even remarkably interesting, she added with the same tone someone might use to announce a breakthrough in theoretical physics. Are you asking me out using scientific terminology? Marcus asked. I'm suggesting that further research into your genetic fascinatingness might be warranted, she replied. Strictly for scientific purposes, of course. Of course, Marcus agreed solemnly. Can't have inadequately researched genetic fascinatingness running around the galaxy. Exactly. Zephyr watched this exchange with growing confusion. Are you two using scientific language to be romantic? Because if so, it's the most wonderfully nerdy thing I've ever witnessed. We're conducting important research, Vera said firmly. Into genetic compatibility, Marcus added with a straight face. Oh. Zephyr's 3 eyes lit up with understanding. That's actually quite scientifically sound methodology for. Zephyr, Marcus interrupted gently, maybe you could go file some reports or discover something fascinating in the other lab for a while? Of course, Dr. Flynn. I'll go investigate the cellular regeneration patterns in the Alterian samples. They're quite remarkable when you consider the implications for. The lab door closed behind the enthusiastic Centaurian before he could finish explaining the implications for anything. Marcus turned back to Vera, who was trying to maintain her scientific objectivity despite a smile that suggested she found his genetic sequences more than adequately fascinating. So, he said, would this research into my genetic fascinatingness involve dinner? Because the station's food synthesizers have been producing something that might technically qualify as edible, and I'm curious whether my problem-solving abilities extend to making it actually taste good. That sounds like a worthwhile experiment, Vera agreed. Though I should warn you that I might want to run extensive tests. I'm a very thorough research subject, Marcus assured her. Their romantic scientific discussion was interrupted by the familiar sound of alarms echoing through the lab. Marcus's genetic scanner was flashing red again, and the words "unknown anomaly detected" were scrolling across his screen. Marcus sighed and reached for his coffee mug. Well, he said, settling back into his chair to investigate whatever new impossible thing had wandered into his laboratory, at least life isn't boring. Behind him, Vera was already pulling up analysis protocols, Zephyr was bouncing with anticipation in the doorway, and somewhere in the station Commander Throck was probably adding more security measures to something that definitely didn't need them. "You know what?" Marcus said, loading the new sample into his scanner. "I think I'm starting to like being the most scientifically interesting human in the galaxy." The scanner finished its analysis and displayed results that were, once again, completely impossible according to known science. Marcus took a sip of his terrible coffee and smiled. Definitely better than boring.